Hello, everyone. Welcome at the Global AI Notes. Just as every week, we are inviting some guests to talk more about AI. And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about accessibility and inclusiveness with AI. You want to learn more? Then stay tuned and watch Global AI Notes today. So, as I said, every week we invite some guests, and today we have Ailsa and Kartik over on our show. Good morning to you, Ailsa and Kartik. How are you both doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm here on the show, so glad to be here.
Yeah, excited to
Let's
be here. Thank you, Sammy.
let's kick off with a small round of introductions. I will start with Ailsa. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from?
Great. So hi, everyone. My name is Ailsa Leen. I am a senior design program manager at Microsoft on the Azure AI team. Our team has different Azure AI services, formerly cognitive services, Azure OpenAI, but my job's focused on making sure all of the tools that we build for developers are accessible, which is what we're here to talk about. And I'm coming to you from Vancouver, BC.
Cool. So we have one person from Canada, and then we have
Yeah.
Kartik.
I'm on the accessibility innovation team at Microsoft. My role is to really try and see how we're able to develop prototypes leveraging the latest in generative AI and AI more generally, and work closely with Microsoft Research, and ultimately try and see how we might be able to reimagine experiences for people with disabilities, bring some new accessibility features and innovations to our products. So I kind of get to do a lot of the hands-on playing around with the latest in AI. I am originally from India, currently in Delhi, based out of Seattle.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think if we think about accessibility and inclusiveness, let's be honest, a decade ago, there was not so much going on around that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Now,
I think. Kartik, what do you think? How has it changed
No,
in the last 10 years?
I absolutely do think it has changed a lot. And I think especially with the whole AI wave that we're seeing right now, I'm ready for a lot more developments to happen rather quickly as well. I kind of sometimes feel that a lot of the progress we've made in the last 10 years we'll probably be making in the next 3 years now. So very excited about where we're headed, but certainly a lot has changed from accessibility being something that was just about compliance and regulation to something that, almost has become a competitive advantage for a lot of companies, including Microsoft.
okay. So, what will we learn today in your session?
Yeah. Elsa, do you want to take it away, or
Yeah,
wanna kick
sure.
it off?
We're still figuring out our tag teaming. I don't know if you realize, Sammy, but we're going to be talking about why it's important when we talk about AI and innovation a lot, right? In general, I'm sure you do on the global AI community, and we talk about how AI can benefit people with disabilities and create lots of cool innovation for accessibility. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're also going to talk about why it's so important that when we build AI tools and we build our AI communities, we think about including practitioners with disabilities as well, like Kartik himself. And, he can talk a little bit about his story, but we can't innovate for accessibility if we don't include developers, data scientists, AI folks with disabilities in at the beginning. And that's how we get, the most inclusive kind of innovation. So that's what I'd say today's talk is about.
All right, then I will say, take it away.
Yeah.
For the ones who are
All right.
listening, please do make use of the comment section to ask questions to Ailsa and Kartik, and then I will ask them those wonderful questions at the end of their presentation. So, Ailsa and Kartik, we're all ears.
Excellent. All right. So I think let's start off with really understanding what accessibility is, because that is something uh, that might not be very clear to a lot of people. And so really starting about accessibility, that is kind of something that is really designing products, services, environment for and by people with disabilities. When we think about accessibility, it's really making sure that whatever you develop is actually something that is usable by, can be accessed by everyone, including people with disabilities, which, by the way, 15 to 16% of the global population is people with disabilities. So we're talking about a very, very large section of the population, which is which often kind of gets forgotten about. We don't really think as much, and so it's really ensuring that features and services and environments are accessible. And also, when you think about disability, it's not just people who have, for example, blindness or low vision. It's not just people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It's also really thinking a lot about people who might have, for example, situational or temporary disabilities, people who might have apparent and non-apparent disabilities. So there's a whole gamut when you think about disabilities, and ensuring that we're developing for all of us is something that that kind of what we mean by accessibility. And to kind of put this in perspective, I'd like to maybe share my own experience as someone who's blind, and what kind of accessibility really meant for me, and how I think assistive technology helped me, but also the lack of accessibility kind of also proved to be a hindrance in my life as well, and me being able to do a lot of the things that I wanted to do. And so, quick background: I was born in Delhi, in India, and right from the beginning, I think one of the challenge was that a lot of the stuff was actually not available in digital formats. And not to age myself, but I'm talking about the early 2000s here, when we were starting to see some of that stuff. And so being able to not being able to read everything that my peers could read, and having a dearth and scarcity of Braille content, for example, was really hard, because then I had to rely on others to be able to learn, to be able to access content, and kind of do a lot of the things that they, for example, could just take for granted. Later on, when I decided in high school that I wanted to pursue STEM, I realized that even though content was available digitally, so there were at that time PDF files, textbooks were available in that format, but I soon realized that they were not compatible with the assistive technology that I use. And what I mean by that is I use a screen reader, which essentially just reads out or speaks out everything on my computer screen, essentially effectively converting my computer into a talking computer. But for it to be able to read out everything to me, things need to be tagged a certain way. They need to be compatible, and majority of the content was not accessible at that time. And so what that meant for me was basically spending 4 hours every single day kind of typing out all of that content, which of course took away from the time that I could have otherwise spent learning, playing, doing other things, right? And so that was kind of really challenging. And then I moved to the US, and things were kind of different, but again, not everything is sort of figured out here as well. And there were still a lot of issues in being able to access a lot of the mainstream content in accessible formats. Disability offices at various universities, you still kind of convert, and often manually, the content into accessible formats. That was kind of a challenge. So you do have to wait for your books, you do have to wait for content, and this particularly becomes challenging when you're assigned a reading, and you've got to kind of do that the same day, and go to class the very next day, right? And so kind of there were those challenges that were very practical challenges. And then of course, when I joined Microsoft, yes, Microsoft does a really commendable job when it comes to accessibility, but like any other organization, like any other company, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single tool that I have to use as an AI scientist is accessible to me. And so oftentimes here as well, we really need to think about accommodations or different ways of kind of doing things when things are not accessible. So again, assistive technology is something that has really had a profound impact in my life, and has really helped me to do whatever I've been able to do. I mean, that actually would not be an understatement. But at the same time, there continues to be a lot of inaccessibility, which continues to prevent me from being able to access a lot of the digital content and digital services that many of you might just kind of, again, do it without even thinking about it. And this is kind of where one of the tenets that we talk about in the disability movement comes and becomes important, which is nothing about us without us. And really thinking about how do we actually make things better than where we're at today. Today, over 96% of the web is inaccessible. And I just want that number to kind of sink in for a second, right? Like 96% of the web being inaccessible means the chances that you're going to go to a website and that website is not going to work with you, or you're going to have inefficiencies in being able to access that website, is 96%, right? And so that's really challenging and rather unfortunate, but that's kind of where we stand right now. And then if you start to think about why that is the case, right? Do developers really not care? Do they not care about people with disabilities? Do they not want to do the right thing? I don't think any of that is true. But the problem is, accessibility is not something that is taught in schools. Accessibility is not something that a lot of the developers, AI scientists, and other people, even outside of technology. I'm talking about tech because we're talking about AI and tech here, but this translates to everything else as well, including infrastructure and just the overall environment around us. But then you start to think about why there is a challenge, and you very quickly realize that there's no education, there's no awareness, there's no best practices and information about how to make things accessible for people with disabilities. And again, that's precisely why it's important to include people with disabilities in the process to ensure that our voices kind of are heard, and we're involved right from the design phase as well, so that we're not kind of thinking about accessibility as an afterthought that just gets bolted on, because that, of course, is a lot of investment that any company would have to make. And then you start to really question ROI and how many people with disabilities use my product, which, by the way, there are flaws with that thinking as well. But really, you've got to think about all of this from the very beginning and include people with disabilities, which is why we're today's talk, Ailsa and I are really just kind of focused on how do we make sure that we're including people with disabilities in the process itself, to ensure that everything is kind of genuinely and accessible and usable based on lived experiences. Now, we kind of wanted to share a couple examples really quickly of what this actually kind of could mean, and what this could look like. And so the first example that we wanted to share was Mentra. This is, again, an organization which is really focused on neurodiverse hiring. This is an AI for Accessibility grantee. AI for Accessibility is a grant program that my team runs at Microsoft, where we invest in companies that are formed by people with disabilities, or develop solutions really thinking about the lived experience that are at the intersection of AI and accessibility. Mentor being one example, right? And so that's kind of the reason this product is so good is because this is based off of lived experiences of people with disabilities, right from the problem to how they've conceived the problem, or conceived the solution, the design of the solution, how it has been implemented, how it has been rolled out, that entire operations, everything ensures the various aspects around disability that they should be thinking about, because there are people with who are neurodiverse involved in an entire process. The second thing is kind of more internal to Microsoft, or rather comes from within Microsoft. And this is Kotak, a very good friend who is also blind, kind of really worked on this. And the whole idea was, how do we make IDEs more accessible for people with disabilities, for developers with disabilities, to help them become more inclusive and more productive at what they do. And this is really important, again, because you want more developers with disabilities to be a part of the industry, so they're able to bring in their perspective to affect change and ensure that products that are being developed are accessible. And so there's kind of another example where we really, they really thought about, how do we use voice, for example, when someone is debugging? How do we kind of present things in a way where it's easy to parse, easy to navigate with the screen reader? How do we basically get almost like a snapshot of the code base in a way that's inclusive, accessible? A lot of those considerations that again come directly from the community is something that is really key. And one other thing that I'd like to highlight here is really also thinking about intersectionality within the community, right? So my identity is not just that I'm blind. There's a lot more to that identity. I'm a blind. I was born in India, so there's that part of that identity. I kind of went to university in the U.S. That's a part of my identity. I identify as male. That's a part of my identity. There's a lot that kind of shapes who you are as a person. So also ensuring that we're being very thoughtful and mindful about intersectionality within disability as well, and including all of that in the design development process by actually having a diversity of people with disabilities be a part of the teams is something that is crucial, that we kind of have been focused on, and that is something that has worked really well. And kind of with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ailsa to talk about how some of that has been realized and some of the work that she's been doing.
Great. Thank you so much, Kartik. So I hope some folks on this call or on this live stream are familiar with Azure AI Studio, but in case you're not, I'll give you a little bit of a primer. Azure AI Studio is essentially our one-stop shop for developers who want to build with generative AI, whether it's building your own custom Copilot experiences or other apps that leverage generative AI. And we have not just a Studio UI where, sort of low-code environment where you can do that, but also an Azure AI SDK if you prefer to stay in code. So we released this to public preview at the Microsoft Ignite event in November last year. And this was a big milestone for us as well, because we ensured, as we were building the public preview, that Azure AI Studio was designed with accessibility in mind. And this was really important to the team, a lot for the reasons that Kartik mentioned, right? We want folks with disabilities or everyone to be able to build the change that they want to see in the world, right? But how can you build and create a better AI-driven world if the tools aren't accessible for everyone? And this new flagship product of ours, it's like Microsoft's one-stop generative AI shop. We knew that people would be looking to us to see what we were doing, and so I really think working at Microsoft and such a big company that we are, it's a responsibility to make sure our products are accessible, and it's also an opportunity because we can empower other developers and different people to create more things with our tools. Right, we're increasing our addressable market at the same time. So just a little bit of what we've been doing along the way, leading up to releasing this public preview. So this is some of the things that I work on in my day job. We added different accessibility stages throughout the product development process, from that initial insights gathering and research stage through to kind of design reviews when we're designing our wireframes and our mockups. Everything that we did, we tested with assistive technology users before it got into the public's hands. And then, of course, before we release, we do a thorough accessibility. So yeah, great. We lost the screen for a second, but we're back. So what did we end up with? The Azure AI Studio that you can use today at ai.azure.com has full SDK and UI support. And we've heard, I've consulted Kartik and other folks who work at Microsoft over the years. I know that many screen reader users prefer to use the SDK or work in code rather than UI, for example. But then there are some scenarios where UI is helpful. So we ensured that kind of full SDK and UI support for all the tests in AI Studio. Did a lot of testing with screen readers and other assistive technology, like I mentioned. One thing that we're really proud of in the studio is the dark mode. So for people with different vision disabilities, whether it's light sensitivity or perhaps neurodivergent conditions, some people prefer dark mode. We've also added the dark mode because we know that many developers spend a lot of time looking at their screens, and light modes can be quite fatiguing on the eyes. So dark mode is just an inclusive feature that benefits everyone. And then, of course, there are a whole host of tools within AI Studio that developers can use to build accessibility into their own apps, right? You can leverage Azure OpenAI to build some cool assistive copilot functionality. And we have speech that you can layer on top of that, and also vision technologies. So there's a lot you can do in AI Studio as a developer with a disability, or as a developer that's looking to build assistive tools or accessible features into your own apps. And that's really how we see the full picture of AI development, at least on my team at Microsoft. And one more thing I forgot to mention. We're doing a project at the moment that I'm really excited about, partnering with Ernst & Young, or EY, and they have something called a Neurodiverse Center for Excellence that's global around the world. EY supports developers or in general professionals who are neurodivergent, and they really see the potential for neurodivergent thinking to innovate, right? So one of EY's slogans is "Great minds don't think alike" in the Neurodiverse Center of Excellence. So we're partnering with EY together to involve the perspectives of neurodivergent users who use Azure AI Studio to help make the studio easier for everyone to use. So this is a really exciting inclusive design project that's coming up for my team. In fact, we're doing a design sprint just next week where we come together with developers who have been using AI Studio for some time to brainstorm improvements on how we can make the whole studio more usable for everyone. So yeah, that's a little tour of what we've been up to, and how we think that these platforms are so important to empower everyone. And I'm going to hand over to Kartik again to talk about an example of a piece of work that he's been doing called Ask Microsoft Accessibility.
Yeah, thanks, Ailsa. So yeah, really kind of putting this all together, right? So Ailsa builds the tools that I then leverage to build cool stuff. So thank you, Ailsa, and team. But this is important, right? Because without this, I can't do my work, right? And then it kind of severely limits the career opportunities that are available to me and other people like me who might be interested in computer science or AI, but not actually be able to do this because of the inaccessibility of tools and the infrastructure available to us, right? So this has been something which actually is, has significant consequences, personal consequences as well. But kind of talking about the example that Ailsa referenced, Ask Accessibility or Ask Microsoft Accessibility, really the problem that we're trying to solve here is there's so much information that comes out of a company like of the size of Microsoft about the various accessibility features that we provide across our products, and any techniques and support and other sort of keystrokes and whatnot, and compatibility with various assistive technologies, etc., with across the sort of the spectrum of tools that and products that we put out, that it becomes really hard for people to be able to kind of keep track of it. But also, searching all of this and reading through documentation can be taxing. And so, of course, taking advantage of a lot of the conversational sort of features that are coming about through generative AI, we kind of built this chatbot, Ask Accessibility again, that really tries to help answer your question in a conversational experience about accessibility sort of features in Microsoft products. So, for example, you could say, "Hey, I use a screen reader. And I want to kind of learn more about how I can use Microsoft Word effectively, or maybe a specific feature in Microsoft Word or Excel or ADO or what have you." And it'll basically be able to fetch the right information from the right sources, and kind of provide that information to you. So it's basically kind of like a GPT for accessibility, but ensuring that it's grounded in sort of trusted sources, and we're really thinking about providing the accurate sort of information guarding against any hallucination whatsoever, to provide a really good experience to a person with a disability or anyone else that might be working with a person with a disability. So any other stakeholder involved in the process as well. Um, talk a little bit about the architecture. For those of you who can see, it's essentially, again, from a technical perspective, from an AI perspective, what we do is we basically leverage Azure OpenAI, and we try and come up. We basically come up with a search query based on the user question and any accompanying context, and then we pass that over. We get a search query, we pass it over to Bing. We whitelist certain specific sort of websites, of course, all Microsoft domain, but also the sort of the web pages and sort of websites that we trust. And then we get that information, augment sort of the prompt that we have, and then we kind of get the answer as sort of in natural language that the person can then reference, right? So that's kind of the sort of the end-to-end flow that we have right now in terms of how the chatbot works. But it didn't really start this way, and so just kind of talk about the process that we sort of underwent to finally get to this point. We were initially thinking of creating something for our internal community, and they were thinking of using RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, coming up with a data set that had a lot of the information that our employees with disabilities, for example, might ask for. We soon realized that just kind of the breadth of information that sort of the employees were asking for is not kind of something that that data set, for example, that at the data set that we had at the time was sort of good enough for. And then we experimented with various approaches and sort of finally landed on this approach of leveraging information retrieval with, of course, leveraging the latest in Gen AI, and being able to provide sort of these answers, ensuring again that all of this is grounded in sort of the actual sources, the trusted sources, and you're providing these citations to people who are asking these questions as well. Now, of course, Ask Accessibility, the preview is live, and so you can kind of go to it and ask any questions that you might have about accessibility of Microsoft tools, products, services, etc. And basically tries to find the right information and then kind of help you through that process. But this has been a very fascinating experience sort of working on this, because we've also been thinking about a lot of the aspects that go into developing a chatbot like this for the disability community, one of which is ableism. And so my colleagues and my team have been doing a lot of work, and across the company have been doing a lot of work around this, where we're really trying to think and ensure that the models that we have are not ableist. And what I mean by that is they don't necessarily perpetuate a lot of the biases that we have around people with disabilities in society. For example, people with disabilities are synonymous with low expectations, or people with disabilities need support and help. People with disabilities can't do A, B, and C, right? A lot of this is something that are sort of common beliefs, misconceptions, stereotypes in the society. And because we're training our large language models and a lot of this data, what ends up happening is that a lot of this feeds into this data and hence into these models, which becomes a problem. And so how do we ensure that our models aren't ableist? They're not starting with, oh, I'm so sorry, the fact that you're blind and you can't do whatever, right? And we don't want that to happen. We want this to be empowering. We want this to understand that, as I said before, disability is only one part of my identity. There's so much more. I can be successful. I can do anything else that others can do. And so to kind of watch out for that and to sort of, again, uh, ensure that is not something that we're seeing in our models, is something that has been very important to us, that we're actively working on, and also was a big part of this project as well. But equally so was also kind of thinking about the accessibility of sorry I'm trying to go back to my slides. Yeah, it was the accessibility of the UI, right? And so you can build the best chatbot in the world, and this chatbot provides you all the correct answers. It's not ableist, it's respectful, inclusive, etc., etc. But then the UI, the underlying UI of the chatbot itself is inaccessible. That doesn't do anyone good, because now a person with a disability, just can't access this chatbot at all. And so we've also been really focused on ensuring that the tool itself is accessible, but also usable. And that distinction is really important because it's not just ensuring that it, for example, complies with accessibility guidelines and laws and regulations, but it's also a lot more about, is this the best experience that we can offer a person with a disability using an assistive technology? Is this kind of the absolute best that that makes sense for them to be able to be interacting with this bot? For example, should, for example, the bot announce when the answer is ready, right, automatically, without kind of, how do we let the person know that the answer is available already? How do we convey those updates, etc., right? So there's a lot sort of that goes into thinking through how you make something accessible for something as new of an experience as a bot or a co-pilot and other things like that. And so this is, again, still work in progress for us, and this will be evolving, of course, and we continue to, again, work with employees with disabilities across the company and the external community, get their perspective and feedback, and try and make this as accessible and inclusive as possible. And so, yeah, really kind of going ahead and thinking about the takeaways from the talk. It's kind of really thinking about making sure that the documents, any content that you put out, any software that you develop is accessible, ensuring that you are using the right tools to do so. Microsoft actually does provide a lot of tools as well. Accessibility checker in Office. We have accessibility insights that you can use for websites, for web development, etc., for example. Ensuring that you're actively using these tools to watch out for any accessibility violations. Also thinking about accessibility of your Gen AI related sort of products, but also, of course, thinking about the models themselves being inclusive, which then means that you're guarding against ableism, but also being extra careful and vigilant about the data that you're training the models off of, right? We kind of we say that there's a data desert in the community right now. When it comes to models for people with disabilities, we don't have enough data, and so how do you ensure that you're being as inclusive as possible when training your models to ensure that they're not going to be ableist or harmful to people with disabilities, and they're not going to perpetuate the biases and stereotypes that exist in our society today. So those are kind of some big sort of takeaways from kind of what we had to share. And Ailsa, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of summed up everything, Kartik, but it's a lot of different information. But I think that one of the points that you just left with, it's up to all of us to build an inclusive AI industry, and especially that learning content piece, right? Let's say the global AI community, or blog posts that people are writing right now. Everyone is learning about AI and kind of sharing their 2 cents, and that's how we're all learning and growing and trying to figure out how to make use of these new technologies that are updating on like a daily, weekly basis, right? That's like such an important part of accessibility for people like you, Kartik, right? And your growth, right? Like if these events aren't accessible, or you can't read the latest paper to learn, about some new model that you might use in your work, then you can't really advance, right? So I think that's a big learning for me too, and something we can all do, right? Because we don't all build Azure AI Studio.
Yeah. And so again, I think one thing that I would again sort of highlight is these are actual people, right? Who who are impacted by small decisions that we make, right? Accessibility is not rocket science, right? It's just really about kind of thinking about it and prioritizing it in whatever you're trying to do. And if you think about it early enough in the process, it's not expensive at all, right? We at Microsoft have learned it like over the years. It just becomes a part of the way you kind of approach problems and the way you do things. And so it's important that you really start to think of it in that respect.
Yeah, it can be as simple as just putting your hand up and saying like, oh, have we thought about accessibility, right? You don't have to answer that, but you put it out there and it's a team problem to solve then, right? And it's just that little moment of someone advocating for it, I think really gets the conversation started.
And there are way too many resources available, a lot from Microsoft
Yes.
as well. So please leverage.
Yeah, I think a lot's been shared in the comments. Thank you, Sammy, for your help there.
Yeah, it was. I learned a lot today. Also, it's. I think accessibility and inclusiveness, it is very important, and a lot of people have not really yet the skills of how do we actually going to implement that in the tools that we're building. So if I could ask you one advice, let's say I'm a software developer, what small thing can I already look into to make it my tool at least already a bit accessible?
Mm-hmm. I think for me, it's basically just being mindful and kind of starting out with a lot of the accessibility testing tools that we have. For example, if you are talking about a web application, kind of just running it past accessibility insights and kind of seeing where where do you stand right now. Just the realization, quite honestly, is a really good starting point, as Ailsa said. And then it's a journey, right? You don't have to like fix everything, at once, because that can get overwhelming. It does get overwhelming, even for Ailsa and I, even though this is kind of what we do all the time, right? And so it can get very overwhelming, but the whole point is just thinking of it as a journey, taking those small steps, following the suggestions that you have, and once you kind of bring it to your management, sort of maybe championing that, and then kind of thinking about how you can actually make that a part of your company culture or organization culture. That's sort of where you should aspire to go to. But just starting out with those tools is a really good starting point in my view.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we have no particular questions anymore right now. I'm sure if people want to have particular questions for you, they can hit you up on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect.
Happy to
Of
engage,
course,
yeah.
you can always still comment on the video, and we can still send them forward to you if you see there's a need to it. So, Ailsa and Kartik, thank you very much, first of all, the work you are doing, and also for this presentation. Now, this is it for tonight, but don't forget, the Global AI Bootcamp has started. Well, from next week, this weekend onwards, we are already over 80 locations worldwide with thousands of attendees. So if you are interested in learning more about AI, do have a look at globalai.community/bootcamp and see if there's any location near you. So we hope to see you next time on the Global AI Notes. We thank you for joining today and hope to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.